priest, a rabbi, and a porn star walk into a bar. Now that I've got your attention, you might be confused by why I would bring up something like that when I am purporting to be a professor of a speech class. It would be confusing, I understand, if I were to stand in front of a class and say that. You would be right to be wondering if perhaps you had walked into the wrong room in this, and it's not helped by the fact that this isn't even a classroom. It makes no sense for me to say that because it would be out of place. It would be, let's say, uncomfortable. It would be wrong for me to say something like that, to start off a class like this or discussion like this and take it in some place that is, let's face it, leading somewhere at best informal, at worst rather offensive. I would not do that. I choose my words more carefully. I choose what I'm going to say and how I'm going to present it more deliberately than that. This is part of what it means to be a professional. This is part of what it means to be an adult. This is part of what it means to be a member of society. We don't just speak lazily about anything that wanders through our ears. We choose what we're going to say, how we're going to say it, when we're going to say it, and in what context we're going to say it. This is significant. Most importantly, I would not say that to a group of people I don't know very well who are just sitting there listening. I can make certain assumptions about you, and believe me, I do. And I couch everything I say in those terms. Speech is supposed to be deliberate. Speech is supposed to be intentional. Speech is supposed to be controlled. And in something as fractious and unstable as communication itself, as I think we've seen, communication in a broad sense where I am addressing a group, I try and control what I can control. And number one in that is, what can I assume about my audience? Rule number one, I would say, of knowing what to say and how to say it is to know your audience. This is paramount. Choosing the appropriate phrasings, choosing the appropriate message within that is much easier if you just spend a little bit of time considering how the average audience would receive what you have to say. There are going to be exceptions, there are going to be anomalies, you cannot control everything, but you can speculate about, well, what would this broadly sound like? What would this likely land as? And from there, you can start to narrow down your focus. It is fair to say that just about everybody speaks with some understanding of whom they are addressing, what audience is likely to have it. And this is something that you need to understand as well. You need to think in terms of, how do I reach certain people? How do I not offend certain people, but how do I communicate specifically to them so that the communication experience is vibrant and constructive and gives all the appearance of the intimacy of one-on-one communication, even if you are speaking to a group. And that is when you know you're communicating well. What can we know about our audience? Well, to know your audience, you can start with, in a professional setting, you can start with professional status. Who is this person that you are speaking to? Be it one person, be it 1,000. What is their likely makeup? What if this is a job interview? And you are, let's say, interviewing for a job and choosing your words very carefully in that. How do you present yourself? What is the role of the person in front of you? What they are assuming. They can be assumed to be professionals in one sphere or another. They can be assumed to be reasonably comfortable. They should not be assumed, depending on the level of interviewing that you're doing. If you're going for an entry-level job, you should not assume that you are speaking to the CEO. There are different assumptions there, so you can start to frame how this person is going to receive you. Number two, I would say professional background. You can do an awful lot of research and figure out, well, okay, these people that I'm speaking to, what have they done? What's their background like? If I'm going to be addressing a group of people who did let's say, Silicon Valley startup, and I knew that they were all coming out of, they all started as a group of friends in Stanford or something, and came and started up their own little company, and now they're really starting to get traction. I can basically put together an image of what's going to inspire them, what's going to grab them, what is going to offend them, what is going to likely communicate well to them. So I can draw some conclusions on that. And for that, you can always do a little research. The internet is a wonderful thing. The social media is remarkable in what people are willing to put out there about themselves. The little portraits they paint of themselves in terms of what they have done in the past is very frequently quite available to you. This goes also with, I would say, number three, educational background. Where did they go to school? How much schooling do they have? What register do you want to pitch to when you are speaking to them? If they are all have professional degrees or advanced degrees in one way or another, you know that you can aim towards one aspect of, or the higher end, let's say, of your vocabulary. If it's less so, and if you just see like somebody who average bachelor degree, then fine, you're going to pitch it on another level. If somebody is a high school dropout and you're speaking to them and you want to communicate to them, you don't necessarily drop big words on them because you're going to look stupid. Having that sort of a profile in front of you can often help in terms of reaching that person. Within that, I would say also, sort of a corollary of the educational proficiency is linguistic proficiency. Is the person you're communicating with a native speaker of English? Are they a native speaker of one other language primarily, if it is a group, or is it going to be a polyglot experience? What is the likelihood you're going to be able to drop, jargon or, euphemisms or other little phrases and bits of trivia that crop up in language that native speakers are privy to and non-natives not so much. You don't want to alienate them by suggesting that, well, okay, you don't understand this reference, so you're not in my little club. You don't want to build up walls like that. You want to try and poke through them, find a conduit for true discourse. Within all of that, but sort of separate, I would put also other idealistic backgrounds of characteristics: political, economic, religious identity. Who are you speaking to? Understand these things as deeply as you can before you start speaking. Before you launch into something and start shooting off your mouth with no idea what somebody's perspective might be. Take basic steps to try and understand, well, what are they likely going to believe? You can see this as being somewhat duplicitous, somewhat two-faced, somewhat superficial, and yes, you are drawing lots of superficial judgments automatically, but we all do all the time. And I'm not saying to necessarily make it a nefarious thing, but to just try and get a sense early on, before you start shooting off your mouth, of, well, what is likely going to be constructive language? What is likely going to be productive discourse in this? I don't want to necessarily start shooting off my mouth about my opinion about this and my opinion about that, and just see that other person look back in horror and lean away from me, because that is not going to be productive. To get beyond that, once you have a sense of whom you're speaking to, or if you have no sense at all, and you find that you still have to begin speaking without knowing so much about your audience, there are a few basics that you can hew to that will keep you more or less embracing the widest swath you possibly can in that audience. So for a universal communication act, you really want to throw the net wide. And for that, you start off with, as I suggested in language, fundamental vocabulary. Don't pull out the 5-syllable words on people. Nobody's really that impressed with that. It just brings up barriers. And the more complicated your language is, the harder it is for anybody else to draw any real benefit from communicating with you, or trying to. The use of large phrases and arcane words tends to wall people off much more than bring them together. If you happen to be somebody who, part of the 1/16th of 1% of people who understand exactly what the proper definition of that one word you just used is, and that other person is just sitting across the table from you, then bully for you, you nailed it. But the odds of that are astronomically remote. Part of number 2 on that, I would say, once you get the words kind of small into 1 or 2 syllables, avoid how many of them you put in a stretch. Short sentences get to the point. Short sentences don't give you a lot of dead ends and lost trails into nothingness. Short sentences start with a subject, go very quickly to a verb, and get to the point immediately. Don't put a lot of commas in your verbal sentences, let's say, or written. You can do this either way. But short sentences drive home a point. Short sentences put a premium on what the sentence is supposed to mean, and not the sentence itself. Don't dangle all sorts of linguistic complication in front of your listener or reader and expect them to follow along. They're just going to start leaning back again, and it's going to get kind of ugly, because they're going to be drawing conclusions about you that you're really just showing off. Corollary to that, avoid acronyms, slang, and jargon, specialized terms, specialized argot that only people in very narrow fields would know. Now, if you are an engineer and you are interviewing another engineer, certainly you can drop lots of specialized language within that. You can, but that goes to knowing your audience. If you know that your audience is an engineer, you can pepper your language with these terms and expect that they'll be able to follow along. But for a general audience, for a more universal scope, you really just got to keep it more open, more accessible. Don't use specialized language. Number 2, you can go back and forth on this. Some people, as an English teacher, some people go kind of crazy with this, but try and use the active voice. Somebody did something. Somebody will do something. Keep it very active instead of something having happen to that person. It just makes for more dynamic language. This goes back primarily to a book by William Strunk or William W.B. White, whatever. Strunk and Wright, and the elements of language. Use an active voice. You don't have to go crazy with that. Some people just, twist the language into all sorts of things. But simple is always the best. And trying to have a dynamic language Generally speaking, in English at least, the active voice tends to work the smoothest for that, the most smoothly, I guess. And number 5, I would say, in considering after you get through speaking to somebody and communicating, do a little due diligence review after you're speaking with someone or writing with someone, and don't be afraid to go up to them and say, well, okay, is everything that I've been saying, does that make sense? Are you following along? Is there anything that I'm leaving you behind on, or am I failing to make my point clear? Try not to make it try not to make it an insult. Try not to suggest that, well, you should be following along, so I'm going to just take the moment to see, well, maybe you're slow. I'll do it. Put the onus on yourself. A little humility never hurts. Say, all right, I'm not sure. Are you following? Do you get what I'm trying to say? I might not be putting it as artfully as perhaps I could. Check with them to just communicate that you are open to criticism of your communication skills. Over time, you will start to develop a sense of this. But when you're first getting a sense of somebody, and you're first in the professional world, let's say, and trying to do this, it doesn't hurt to do a little check every now and then and say, well, okay, is this working? Am I being effective? Am I getting through to people? And then find out, well, gee, when you say that thing, when you have that line, when you go into this little spiel, you kind of lose people. You're not making much sense. So that little self-awareness, that self-knowledge will pay off tremendously as you go forward, because then you can start to correct. And not only correct that, okay, that one part of it is bad, but how about we dig into, well, what led me to communicate that in the first place? Why did I go to there? Do I always feel like I have to go to making a joke at this point? Why do I do that? And why do I need to do that? Sometimes it's good to lead with a little humor. Sometimes it's going to be off-putting and people are going to be a little bit confused. Sometimes you want to communicate seriousness and the joke is really going to land flat. All of these things come with practice. All of these things come with an increased sense of self-awareness and the confidence that comes in experience of communicating with people. And if you have that, then it only gets stronger. Over time, you will get better. Bearing these things in mind, I know it's an awful lot to keep in the back of your head as you're trying to just do a very simple thing and make somebody understand what you're saying. But if you attend to what you're saying, and if you attend to the reception of what you're saying, those skills get sharper. Those skills will propel you through, so that over time your ability to communicate will improve immeasurably. But it begins with that thought process before you ever open your mouth.